The crystal chandelier above our table cast shadows across my husband's face as he raised his wine glass, and I knew from that smirk that I was about to become the evening's entertainment again. "To my beautiful wife, Dolores," Vernon announced loudly enough for the entire restaurant to hear. 43 years of marriage, and she still thinks a stock option is something you order at the soup kitchen. The laughter from his family cut through me like broken glass. My son Terence nearly choked on his lobster, while my daughter-in-law Shanae covered her mouth with her napkin, her shoulders shaking. Even my father-in-law Augustus, sitting at the head of the table in his $1,000 suit, allowed himself a chuckle as he adjusted his gold watch. I smiled and nodded, just like I always did, just like I'd been doing for decades. "Oh, Daddy, that's terrible," my daughter Keisha said, but she was grinning too. "Mama, you know he's just playing with you." Playing with me. That's what they called it when Vernon made me the punchline at family gatherings, business dinners, and church events. When he told people I was just decorative, and that the Lord blessed him with beauty instead of brains in a wife. When he introduced me to his colleagues as the little woman who keeps my house pretty. I took a sip of my water and glanced around the private dining room of Le Bernardin. The restaurant was Vernon's choice, of course. Everything was always Vernon's choice. He'd picked this place to celebrate what he called the biggest deal in Coleman Industries history, a merger that would make him CEO when his father finally stepped down next month. "Seriously, though," Vernon continued, loosening his tie as the wine hit him, "Dolores wouldn't know a balance sheet from a bedsheet. Good thing, too, because someone needs to focus on the important things, like making sure my shirts are pressed and my dinner's ready when I get home." More laughter. Augustus nodded approvingly at his son, the way he always did when Vernon put me in my place. The old man had built Coleman Industries from nothing, starting with a single construction crew in Southeast D.C. back in 1962. Now the company owned half the commercial real estate between Baltimore and Richmond, and Vernon was his golden child, his chosen successor. "Dad's right," Terence chimed in. He was 34 now, working as Vernon's assistant at the company, learning the business so he could take over someday. "Mom, remember when you asked me what a fiscal quarter was? I had to explain it like 3 times. "I was just trying to understand your work, baby," I said softly, keeping my voice steady the way Mama taught me all those years ago. "Keep your voice steady, your back straight, and your dignity intact," she used to say. "Let them think they know you." Shanae leaned over and patted my hand condescendingly. "It's okay, Mrs. Coleman. Not everyone is cut out for business. You're so good at other things, like those beautiful flower arrangements you do for the church." Before we continue, please drop a comment if you've ever experienced something like this. We'd love to hear your story and subscribe to the channel to help us grow. The waitress brought out dessert, some fancy French thing that cost more than most people made in a day. As they dug in, the conversation turned to the merger details, and I found myself thinking about the first time Vernon brought me to a business dinner. It was 1985, 3 years after we'd gotten married. I was 25 then, fresh out of Howard University with a degree in business administration and enough fire in my belly to change the world. Vernon was different back then, too, still arrogant but charming about it. He'd swept me off my feet during my senior year, promising me we'd build an empire together. "You're going to love the business world, Dee," he'd told me on our honeymoon. "We'll be partners in everything." But that first dinner, when I tried to contribute to a conversation about municipal contracts, Vernon had put his hand on my knee under the table and squeezed, hard. "Sweetheart," he'd said with that same smile he was wearing now, "why don't you tell Mrs. Jameson about that lovely charity luncheon you're planning? Leave the business talk to us men." I'd swallowed my words that night, told myself it was just nerves, that Vernon was trying to protect me from embarrassing myself. But the pattern continued. Every time I showed interest in the company, Vernon would redirect me towards something more suitable: charity work, church activities, decorating the house. When I got pregnant with Terence, Vernon convinced me to stay home. Just until the baby's older, he'd promised. But by the time Keisha was born 2 years later, I was already settled into the role of the quiet wife who looked pretty at company events and kept her mouth shut about business. The beauty of this merger, Augustus was saying now, cutting into my memories, is that it positions Vernon perfectly for when I retire. The board of directors is already on board, pun intended. He chuckled at his own joke. Vernon's been groomed for this his whole life. Dad, you know I won't let you down, Vernon said, reaching across the table to shake his father's hand. Coleman Industries is going to reach heights you never imagined. I watched this exchange with the same expression I'd worn for 43 years. Pleasant, supportive, slightly vacant. They had no idea that I'd been the one feeding Vernon information for the past decade, that when he came home stressed about difficult negotiations, I was the one who'd suggest strategies that always seemed to work. They thought his sudden brilliance in recent years was just him finally hitting his stride. "Mama, you're being awfully quiet," Keisha observed. She was 31 now, working as a pediatric nurse, the one child who'd always treated me with some respect. "You feeling okay?" "I'm fine, baby, just enjoying listening to y'all talk." I smiled at my daughter, the only one at this table who still called me Mama instead of Mother or Mrs. Coleman. "I'm proud of your daddy." Vernon beamed like I'd just handed him a trophy. "See? Even Dolores knows I'm destined for great things, though I'm sure she's just happy that her shopping budget's about to get a lot bigger." The table erupted in laughter again. I nodded and smiled, playing my part perfectly. They had no idea. They had no idea that while Vernon was at work thinking he was building his empire, I'd been building my own. They had no idea about the investment portfolio I'd been growing since 1987, started with the inheritance my grandmother left me. Money Vernon never knew existed because he'd never bothered to ask about my family's finances. They had no idea about the shell companies, the strategic purchases, the careful maneuvering that had taken me nearly 2 decades to execute. Most importantly, they had no idea that the woman they'd spent 43 years dismissing as a pretty decoration actually owned 56% of Coleman Industries. "Speaking of the future," Augustus said, raising his glass again, "I have an announcement to make." The table fell silent. "Effective next Monday, I'm officially stepping down as CEO. Vernon, congratulations. You're now running the whole show." The celebration was immediate and loud. Vernon stood up, accepting handshakes and hugs from his children and their spouses. Shanae was already talking about the celebration party they'd need to throw. Terrence was calculating his own promotion opportunities. "Dolores," Augustus called to me over the noise, "I hope you're ready to be a CEO's wife. It's a big responsibility." I looked at him. This man who'd spent decades treating me like expensive furniture, who'd never once asked my opinion on anything that mattered, who'd built his fortune on the backs of good people and then acted like he'd done it all through divine inspiration. "Actually, Mr. Coleman," I said, my voice still soft but somehow carrying clearly through the din, "I think there might be a small problem with that plan." The table gradually quieted as everyone turned to look at me. Vernon frowned, probably worried I was about to embarrass him by saying something stupid about business again. "What kind of problem, Mama?" Keisha asked gently. I reached into my purse and pulled out a folder I'd been carrying for 3 weeks, waiting for exactly this moment. My hands were steady as I placed it on the table in front of Augustus. "The problem," I said, looking directly at my father-in-law, "is that Vernon can't be CEO of a company he doesn't control." Augustus laughed, but it came out forced. "Dolores, sweetheart, I'm not sure what you think you know about corporate structure, but I know that Coleman Industries went public in 1998, I interrupted, my voice still calm. "I know that the majority shareholder has controlling interest in all major decisions, including the selection of company leadership." Vernon was staring at me like I'd started speaking in tongues. "Dee, what are you talking about? The family owns the controlling interest. Dad made sure of that years ago." Your father owns 28%, I continued. You own 12%. Terrence owns 4%. The remaining shares are split between various investment groups and individual investors. That's right, Augustus said slowly, his face growing pale. But combined, the family doesn't vote as a block, I said, opening the folder. According to the corporate bylaws that you wrote yourself, Mr. Coleman, each shareholder votes independently. And the single largest shareholder has the right to call for new leadership at any time. I pulled out a document and slid it across the table. Augustus picked it up with shaking hands, his eyes scanning the page rapidly. The color drained from his face completely. This isn't possible, he whispered. What is it? Vernon demanded, grabbing the document from his father. What does it say? I watched my husband read the stock ownership disclosure, watched his face change from confusion to disbelief to something approaching terror. Vernon, I said gently, using the same tone I'd used to comfort our children when they scraped their knees. Meet the majority shareholder of Coleman Industries. She's been sitting next to you at every board meeting for the past 5 years. But you've never noticed because you were too busy making jokes about her to pay attention to the name on the attendance sheet. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the kitchen staff working 3 rooms away. Shanae broke first. This has to be some kind of mistake. Mrs. Coleman, you don't understand how— I understand perfectly. I stood up slowly, smoothing down my dress. I understand that for 43 years, you've all treated me like I was too stupid to tie my own shoes. I understand that you've built your entire future on the assumption that I was just decorative furniture in Vernon's life. I walked around the table until I was standing behind Augustus's chair. I also understand, I continued, that as of tomorrow morning there's going to be a new CEO of Coleman Industries. Someone who actually knows the difference between a stock option and a soup kitchen. Vernon's voice came out as a croak. Dee, how did the pretty little wife who can't balance a checkbook manage to quietly buy up the majority shares of a multi-million-dollar company over the course of 15 years? I smiled, and for the first time in decades, it was completely genuine. Very carefully, Vernon. Very, very carefully. I picked up my purse and headed for the door, then turned back to face my family one last time. Oh, and Vernon? You might want to start looking for a new job. I'm calling an emergency board meeting for first thing Monday morning, and I have a feeling there are going to be some significant personnel changes. As I walked out of that restaurant, leaving behind 43 years of humiliation and a table full of people who'd just realized they never knew me at all, I could hear Vernon calling my name behind me. But I didn't turn around. I had a company to run. My phone started ringing before I even made it to the parking garage. I stood next to my silver Mercedes, the one Vernon thought I'd picked because it was pretty, and watched his name flash across the screen for the 4th time in 2 minutes. Each call went to voicemail. Each voicemail was more desperate than the last. Dee, please, you're being ridiculous. Come back inside so we can talk about this like adults. Dolores, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but this isn't funny anymore. Baby, please pick up. Whatever's going on, we can fix this. I deleted each message without listening to the end and drove home to the house I'd been decorating and maintaining for 4 decades. The house where I'd hidden my true self behind carefully arranged flowers and perfectly pressed linens while building an empire in secret. The house that Vernon was about to lose. By the time I pulled into our driveway in Potomac, Maryland, my phone had registered 23 missed calls. 17 from Vernon, 4 from Terrence, 2 from Augustus. None from Keisha, which told me she was probably the only one smart enough to realize that her mama wasn't playing games anymore. I sat in my car for a moment, looking at the colonial-style home we'd bought in 1989. 5 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, a 3-car garage, and a perfectly manicured lawn that the neighbors always complimented. Vernon loved to tell people we'd gotten it, because a man of my stature needs a house that reflects his success. He'd never mentioned that I'd put down 60% of the purchase price with money I'd inherited from my great-aunt Celia. Money I'd told him came from a much smaller inheritance, so he wouldn't start making plans for it. Inside, I kicked off my heels and padded to my home office, the room Vernon thought I used for charity paperwork and recipe organizing. I unlocked the filing cabinet he'd never bothered to open and pulled out 3 thick folders. The first contained documentation of every stock purchase I'd made since 1987, starting with the initial $50,000 Grandmama left me. While Vernon was busy climbing the corporate ladder at Coleman Industries, I'd been quietly buying shares through a web of investment accounts he didn't know existed. The second folder held copies of every business plan Vernon had brought home over the years, every strategy session he'd complained about, every merger discussion he'd shared with me during pillow talk. Information I'd carefully analyzed and used to time my stock purchases perfectly. The third folder was my favorite. It contained detailed records of every public humiliation, every dismissive comment, every time Vernon or his family had treated me like I was too stupid to understand basic concepts. I'd been keeping track for 15 years, not out of spite, but because I'd learned from my grandmother that you should always document your reasons for the choices you make. When you decide to change your life, Grandmama used to say, you better be sure you remember why you needed to change it in the first place. I was deep in reviewing the corporate bylaws when I heard Vernon's car in the driveway. He came through the front door like a man possessed, calling my name before he'd even closed it behind him. Dolores! Dee! Where are you? In my office, I called back calmly. He appeared in the doorway, his tie crooked and his hair disheveled. Behind him, I could see Terrence hovering in the hallway like he was afraid to come too close. Okay, Vernon said, breathing hard. I don't know what kind of nonsense somebody's been filling your head with, but this has gone far enough. You can't just waltz into a restaurant and start making claims about owning companies. That's not how the real world works. I looked up from my papers and studied my husband's face. Even now, even after seeing the documentation with his own eyes, he couldn't quite believe that his decorative wife had outmaneuvered him. Vernon, sit down. I don't want to sit down. I want you to explain what kind of scam somebody's running on you because there's no way. Sit down. This time, my voice carried the authority I'd been hiding for 4 decades. Vernon's mouth snapped shut, and he sank into the chair across from my desk. Terrence crept closer to the doorway. Mama, we're just confused. How could you own more than half the company when I'm too stupid to understand basic business concepts? I finished for him. Is that what you were going to say, baby? My son had the grace to look ashamed. That's not... you never seemed interested in the family business that your father made very clear was not my place to understand. I opened the first folder and pulled out a document. Let me tell you a story about interest, Terrence. Before we continue, if this story resonates with you, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss our next story. I slid a bank statement across the desk to Vernon. December 1987. I used the money my grandmother left me to open an investment account. $50,000. You remember that inheritance, don't you, Vernon? You said I should put it somewhere safe and forget about it. Vernon picked up the statement, his eyes widening as he saw the account balance. I did put it somewhere safe, I continued. I invested in blue-chip stocks, municipal bonds, and a little startup technology company that reminded me of what your father was trying to build. That technology company? It became Microsoft. My $50,000 turned into $500,000 by 1992. But that doesn't explain how you bought Coleman Industries stock, Terrence said. The family controlled the majority when the company was private, I interrupted. But when your grandfather took Coleman Industries public in 1998, he made a crucial mistake. He assumed that because I'd never shown interest in business, I wouldn't understand what going public meant. I pulled out another set of documents. It meant that for the first time, Coleman Industries stock was available for anyone to buy. And I'd spent 11 years learning everything I could about investing. Vernon was staring at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. "You've been buying our stock for 7 years?" 27 years, I corrected. "I started with private purchases from employees who needed cash. Your father offered stock options to longtime workers back in the 80s, remember? Men like Walter Thompson, who worked construction for you for 15 years before his back gave out. He needed money for his medical bills." Vernon's face went white. Walter Thompson had been at our church. I'd organized meals for his family when he got sick. "You bought Walter's stock?" "I helped Walter pay his medical bills and keep his house," I said firmly. "He was grateful to sell his shares to someone he trusted. Just like Geneva, Washington was grateful when I bought hers after her husband died. And like Carlton Mitchell was grateful when I bought his shares to help pay for his daughter's college tuition." I could see understanding dawning in Terrence's eyes. "You've been helping people in the community while buying up the company." "I've been doing what your father and grandfather should have been doing all along," I said. "Taking care of the people who built this business. Every share I bought came with a story, a family that needed help, a worker who'd given their best years to Coleman Industries and deserved better than a pink slip when times got tough." Vernon finally found his voice. "Dee, even if all this is true, you can't just take over the company. The board of directors will do exactly what the majority shareholder tells them to do," I finished. "That's how corporations work, Vernon. I thought you knew that." I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a contact I'd been saving for this moment. "Hello, Mr. Washington? This is Dolores Coleman. I think it's time we had that conversation we discussed." Vernon and Terrence exchanged worried glances as I spoke into the phone. "Yes, sir. Monday morning at 9. I'll have all the documentation ready. No, I don't think we'll need security, but I appreciate the offer. Yes, sir. I'll see you then." I hung up and smiled at my family. That was Jerome Washington, senior partner at Washington Foster & Associates. He's been my attorney for the past 10 years. "Your attorney?" Vernon sputtered. "What do you need an attorney for?" "Corporate law is complicated," I said mildly. I wanted to make sure I understood all my rights and responsibilities as a majority shareholder. Jerome's been very helpful in explaining things like fiduciary duty, shareholder advocacy, and executive compensation review. The color had completely drained from Vernon's face. "Executive compensation review?" "Oh, yes. Did you know that as majority shareholder, I have the right to review all executive salaries and benefits, including the very generous package you've been paying yourself for the past 5 years?" I flipped through another folder. Interesting reading, especially the part about the company car, the country club membership, and that lovely bonus you gave yourself last Christmas. Terrence sank into the chair next to his father. "Mama, what are you planning to do?" I looked at my son, my baby who'd grown up thinking his mama was just a pretty decoration, who'd learned to dismiss women's opinions because that's what his father had taught him was normal. "I'm planning to run Coleman Industries the way it should have been run from the beginning," I said. "With respect for the workers, investment in the community, and leadership that understands the difference between earning success and inheriting it." Vernon's phone rang. He answered it without looking away from me. "What? Slow down, Dad." "She what?" "No, that's not possible. Wait, you're sure?" Okay, I'll be right there." He hung up and stared at me with something approaching fear. "That was your father," he said slowly. "He's been calling board members. Dolores, they're confirming your story. You really do own 56% of the company." "I know. But how did we not know? How did this stay hidden for so long?" I stood up and walked around the desk until I was standing in front of my husband and son. 2 grown men who suddenly looked very small and very lost. "It stayed hidden," I said gently, "because for 43 years, you've seen exactly what you expected to see. A quiet wife who arranges flowers and keeps house. A woman who smiles and nods and never asks difficult questions." I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out one more document. "But I've been asking difficult questions for decades. Questions like why Coleman Industries has never hired a black woman for an executive position, why the company's charitable giving is less than 1% of annual profits, why employee wages haven't kept pace with inflation while executive bonuses have tripled. Vernon looked at the paper I'd handed him. It was a detailed business plan, 40 pages long, outlining structural changes for Coleman Industries. You wrote this? I wrote this. I also wrote the proposal for the affordable housing project that you shot down last year. The employee profit-sharing plan that your father said was too generous, and the community investment initiative that the board tabled indefinitely. I walked to the window and looked out at our perfectly manicured lawn. In a few hours, the sun would rise on a completely different world. Vernon, for 43 years, I've been the woman you wanted me to be. Quiet, decorative, grateful for whatever scraps of respect you decided to throw my way. But that woman was never the real me. She was just the mask I wore while I built something better. When I turned around, both Vernon and Terrence were staring at the business plan. Mama, Terrence said quietly, this is really good. These ideas could revolutionize how the company operates. I know, baby. I've been developing them for 15 years. Vernon looked up at me, and for the first time in decades, I saw something other than condescension in his eyes. Dee, if you've been planning this for so long, if you really do control the company now, he swallowed hard. What's going to happen to me? I walked back to my desk and sat down, folding my hands in my lap, the way my mother taught me when I was a little girl learning how to be a lady. That depends, Vernon, on what kind of man you decide to be starting right now. Before he could ask what I meant, my phone rang. I glanced at the caller ID and smiled. Hello, Augustus. Dolores. My father-in-law's voice was tight with barely controlled rage. I don't know what kind of game you think you're playing, but it's not a game, I interrupted. And Augustus? You might want to call me Mrs. Coleman from now on. After Monday morning, I'll be your boss. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I thought he might have hung up. Mrs. Coleman, he said finally, his voice dripping with venom. If you think I'm going to let some uppity housewife destroy everything I've built, you're even more foolish than I thought. I felt Vernon and Terrence tense in their chairs, but I just smiled. Augustus, in 43 years, you've never once asked me where I went to school, what I studied, or what I might be capable of if someone actually gave me a chance. You've never wondered why your son's business strategies got so much better after he married me, or how a simple housewife managed to give him advice that consistently worked. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that for the past 20 years, every major decision Vernon has made at Coleman Industries has been based on conversations we had over dinner. I'm talking about the fact that the decorative wife you've spent decades dismissing has a bachelor's degree in business administration from Howard University and an MBA from Georgetown that she earned through night classes while raising your grandchildren. Another long silence. That's impossible. Vernon never mentioned it because Vernon never asked, just like you never asked. Just like none of you ever bothered to wonder what I might be capable of if you'd treated me like I had a brain instead of like I was a pretty lamp in the corner of the room. I could hear Augustus breathing heavily through the phone. Mrs. Coleman, he said finally, perhaps we should meet and discuss this situation like reasonable adults. We will, I agreed. Monday morning at 9 o'clock, in the boardroom, where you'll formally resign as chairman of the board and transfer all executive authority to the new CEO. And who exactly do you think is going to be the new CEO? I looked at Vernon, who was staring at me with a mixture of terror and something that might have been admiration. That depends on how quickly your son learns to treat me like a partner instead of a decoration. Augustus's voice dropped to a growl. Dolores, if you think I'm going to hand over my life's work to... You're not handing it over, I said calmly. I'm taking it. There's a difference. I hung up and set the phone down gently. Vernon cleared his throat. Dee, what did you mean about me treating you like a partner? I studied my husband's face, looking for any sign that he might finally be ready to see me as an equal. I meant exactly what I said. For 43 years, you've had a business partner sitting right next to you. Someone who's been contributing to your success in ways you never bothered to notice or acknowledge. Someone who's been quietly building her own empire while you took credit for ideas that came from our conversations. But if I could learn to... Vernon struggled with the words. If you could learn to respect me, to value my opinions, to treat me like I have something worthwhile to contribute to the business I now own? I leaned back in my chair. Then maybe we could discuss your future at Coleman Industries. Terrence leaned forward. What about me, Mama? What about my future with the company? I smiled at my son, remembering the little boy who used to help me in the garden, who'd ask me why flowers needed different kinds of soil to grow. That depends, baby, on whether you can learn to see women, including your wife, as equals instead of accessories. Your daddy's attitude didn't develop in a vacuum. He learned it somewhere, and unfortunately, he's been teaching it to you. My phone buzzed with a text message. I glanced at it and felt my heart rate pick up. It was from Jerome Washington. Emergency development. Augustus Coleman filed an injunction 20 minutes ago trying to block Monday's meeting. We need to talk tonight. I looked up at Vernon and Terrence, both of whom were watching me with worried expressions. Boys, I said, standing up and gathering my papers. I'm afraid our conversation is going to have to wait. It seems your father and grandfather aren't planning to go quietly after all. Vernon's face went pale. What do you mean? I held up my phone so they could see the text message. I mean that Augustus has just declared war on me. And tomorrow morning, he's going to learn exactly what kind of woman he's been underestimating for the past 4 decades. As I walked toward the door, I could hear Vernon calling my name again. But this time, I didn't stop. I had a war to win. Sunday morning found me in the front pew of New Hope Baptist Church, just like I'd been every week for the past 43 years. But this time, I wasn't there as Vernon Coleman's quiet wife. I was there as the majority owner of one of the largest construction companies in the Mid-Atlantic, preparing for the fight of my life. Pastor Williams had barely finished the opening prayer when my phone vibrated with a call from Jerome Washington. Mrs. Coleman, we have a problem. Jerome's voice was tight with urgency. Augustus filed more than just an injunction. He's claiming you used insider information to manipulate stock purchases. He's trying to get the SEC involved. I stepped out of the sanctuary and into the church lobby, keeping my voice low. Can he do that? He can try. But Dolores, I've been reviewing your documentation all night. Every purchase you made was legal and properly disclosed. You've been filing the required SEC forms as a major shareholder for years. The problem is that Augustus is claiming mental incompetence. My blood went cold. What do you mean? He's filed an affidavit claiming that you're not mentally capable of understanding complex financial transactions. He's arguing that someone must have manipulated you into making these purchases and that the stock transfers should be declared invalid. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. Even now, even faced with legal proof of my competence, Augustus was so invested in seeing me as inferior that he'd rather destroy my reputation than accept reality. Jerome, how do we fight this? Emergency hearing tomorrow morning at 9, Federal Courthouse downtown. Augustus has hired Whitman, Crenshaw, and Associates. They're bringing the big guns. But Dolores, I've got something even better. What's that? I've got the truth. And after 43 years of people underestimating you, the truth is going to be devastating. When I returned to the sanctuary, Vernon was sitting 3 rows behind me with Terrence and Shanae. He'd been trying to catch my eye all morning, but I wasn't ready to deal with him yet. I had bigger problems. After service, I was gathering my things when Keisha appeared beside me. Mama, can we talk? I looked at my daughter. Really looked at her. At 31, she had my eyes but her father's stubborn chin. She'd become a pediatric nurse despite Vernon's suggestions that she find something more suitable for a lady, and she'd married a good man who treated her as an equal partner. Of course, baby. Walk with me to the car. Outside in the parking lot, Keisha took my arm. Mama, I need you to know something. I've always known you were smarter than Daddy gave you credit for. Oh? Remember when I was in high school, struggling with calculus? You helped me understand concepts that my teacher couldn't explain. And when I was applying to nursing school, you're the one who helped me write my application essays. Daddy kept saying I should consider easier options, but you believed I could do anything. I felt tears prick my eyes. I just wanted you to know you had choices, baby. I know. And Mama, when Terrence called me last night, panicking about what you'd done, all I could think was, finally. Finally, you're letting them see who you really are. Before we continue, please comment below as I'd love to hear your thoughts and subscribe to the channel to help us hit that big 1,000 subscriber milestone. I hugged my daughter tight, drawing strength from her support. It's going to get ugly, Keisha. Your grandfather is trying to have me declared mentally incompetent. What? Keisha's voice rose loud enough to draw stares from other churchgoers. That's ridiculous. Mama, you've been managing the household finances for decades. You've organized every church fundraiser for the past 20 years. You've been on the board of 3 different charities. I know, baby, but Augustus has never paid attention to any of that. To him, I'm just Vernon's decoration. Well, he's about to learn different. Keisha's voice carried the same steel I'd been hiding for 4 decades. Mama, whatever you need, character witnesses, documentation, anything, I'm here. That evening, I sat in my home office preparing for the next day's battle when Vernon appeared in the doorway. Can I come in? I gestured to the chair across from my desk. He sat down heavily, looking older than his 68 years. Dee, I've been thinking about what you said last night, about treating you like a partner. And? I realize I've spent our entire marriage seeing what I expected to see instead of who you actually are. He ran his hands through his gray hair. I talked to Jerome Washington today. I raised an eyebrow. You called my attorney? I wanted to understand what's happening tomorrow. Dee, he told me about your educational background, about the MBA you earned while raising our children. Why didn't you ever tell me? I set down my pen and really looked at my husband. Vernon, do you remember what happened the first time I tried to contribute to a business conversation? That was different. You were young and I was trying to protect. You were trying to put me in my place, I interrupted. And every time I showed interest in the company after that, you redirected me towards something more appropriate. When I mentioned wanting to go back to school, you said we couldn't afford it. When I suggested business strategies, you'd implement them but never give me credit. Vernon's face crumpled. The night classes. You told me you were taking flower arranging classes. I was taking MBA courses at Georgetown. For 3 years, Vernon. 3 years of driving to campus after putting the children to bed, studying in the church parking lot before meetings, writing papers while you slept. I pulled out a framed diploma I'd kept hidden in my desk drawer. I graduated summa cum laude. Vernon stared at the diploma like it was a foreign object. You've had a master's degree for 26 years? I've had the education to run Coleman Industries for 26 years, but you were so convinced I was intellectually inferior that you never bothered to ask about my night classes. Never wondered why my flower arranging homework looked suspiciously like business coursework. God, Dee, I'm so sorry. I've been such a fool. Yes, you have. I said it without anger, just stating a fact. The question now is what you plan to do about it. Vernon looked up at me with something approaching desperation. What can I do? How do I fix 43 years of being an arrogant ass? You can start by helping me tomorrow. Your father is trying to destroy me, Vernon. He's claiming I'm mentally incompetent, that I couldn't possibly have made these stock purchases on my own. He's willing to humiliate me publicly rather than admit he was wrong about who I am. What do you need me to do? I studied his face, looking for any sign that this was manipulation, another attempt to control the situation. But all I saw was a man who'd finally realized he'd been married to a stranger for 4 decades. I need you to testify about my contributions to your business success. I need you to tell the court about all the times I gave you advice that worked, all the strategies that came from our dinner conversations. I need you to admit publicly that your wife has been your secret weapon for 20 years. Vernon nodded slowly. And after tomorrow? If we win? If we win, you'll get the chance to learn how to be married to an equal instead of a decoration. But Vernon, I'm done being dismissed, belittled, and treated like my opinions don't matter. If you can't handle being married to a woman who owns the company you work for, then we have other decisions to make. The next morning, the federal courthouse downtown was packed. Augustus had clearly been busy over the weekend. Half the city's business elite seemed to be in attendance, along with reporters from the Washington Post and Baltimore Sun. I walked into that courtroom wearing my best Navy suit and carrying a briefcase full of documentation that would change everything. Jerome was waiting at our table, looking confident despite the odds. "How are you feeling?" he asked as I sat down. "Like I've been preparing for this moment my entire life." Across the aisle, Augustus sat with 3 lawyers from Whitman, Crenshaw and Associates. When he saw me, his face hardened into a mask of disdain. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Patricia Morrison." Judge Morrison was a black woman in her 50s who'd made her name prosecuting white-collar crime before being appointed to the federal bench. As she took her seat, I felt a flicker of hope. "This is an emergency hearing in the matter of Coleman versus Coleman," Judge Morrison announced. "Mr. Whitman, you've filed for an injunction preventing Mrs. Coleman from exercising shareholder rights on the grounds of mental incompetence. Please proceed." Attorney Charles Whitman stood up, adjusting his expensive suit. "Your Honor, my client Augustus Coleman has spent 60 years building Coleman Industries into a pillar of this community. He is understandably concerned that his daughter-in-law, Mrs. Dolores Coleman, appears to have been manipulated into making complex financial transactions that she could not possibly understand. On what basis do you claim Mrs. Coleman lacks the mental capacity to make these decisions?" "Your Honor, Mrs. Coleman has no background in business or finance. She has spent her entire adult life as a homemaker. The idea that she could independently orchestrate the purchase of millions of dollars in stock over multiple decades is simply not credible." I felt my jaw clench, but Jerome placed a calming hand on my arm. "Furthermore," Whitman continued, "we believe Mrs. Coleman has been taken advantage of by unscrupulous financial advisors who saw an opportunity to manipulate a vulnerable woman." Judge Morrison looked over at our table. "Mr. Washington, how does your client respond to these allegations?" Jerome stood up with a smile. "Your Honor, we welcome the opportunity to demonstrate Mrs. Coleman's exceptional qualifications to make these financial decisions. But first, I'd like to address Mr. Whitman's characterization of my client as a simple homemaker." He walked to the witness stand and gestured for me to join him. "Mrs. Coleman, please tell the court about your educational background." I stood up and walked to the witness stand, feeling the eyes of everyone in the courtroom on me. For 43 years, I'd been invisible in rooms like this. Today, I was going to make sure they never forgot me. I have a bachelor's degree in business administration from Howard University, graduating magna cum laude in 1982. I earned my MBA from Georgetown University in 1999, graduating summa cum laude while working full-time as a mother and homemaker. A murmur went through the courtroom. I could see Augustus's face growing red. "Mrs. Coleman, the plaintiff has suggested that you lack the knowledge to make complex financial decisions. Can you explain your investment strategy?" I turned to face the courtroom, making eye contact with Augustus. "I began investing in 1987 with a $50,000 inheritance. I researched growth stocks, technology companies, and municipal bonds, building a diversified portfolio over 15 years before beginning to purchase Coleman Industries stock. Every purchase was made after careful analysis of the company's quarterly reports, market conditions, and growth potential. And how did you finance these purchases? Through the profits from my investment portfolio, which grew from $50,000 to over $8 million between 1987 and 2002. I used these funds to purchase Coleman Industries stock whenever employees needed to sell their shares for personal reasons. Augustus leaned over and whispered something urgent to his lead attorney. Mrs. Coleman, Jerome continued, the plaintiff suggests you've been manipulated by financial advisors. Who managed your investment decisions? I did. I researched every investment myself, using resources at the library and later online. I filed all required SEC disclosures personally. I maintained detailed records of every transaction. I gestured toward the boxes of documentation on our table. Every decision was mine alone. Judge Morrison leaned forward. Mrs. Coleman, these are sophisticated financial transactions. How did you acquire the knowledge to manage such a complex portfolio? Your Honor, I spent 15 years educating myself about finance and corporate law. But more importantly, I spent 20 years listening to my husband and father-in-law discuss Coleman Industries business over dinner. I analyzed their strategies, researched their competitors, and identified opportunities they missed. Many of the company's most successful initiatives over the past 2 decades originated from suggestions I made to my husband during private conversations. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Vernon, who was sitting in the gallery, looked like he wanted to disappear. Your Honor, Whitman interjected, this is clearly a fabricated story designed to— Mr. Whitman, Judge Morrison said sharply, your client will have an opportunity to cross-examine. Please allow the witness to finish. Jerome smiled. Mrs. Coleman, can you give the court a specific example of business advice you provided to your husband? In 2018, Coleman Industries was considering a merger with Hartwell Construction. My husband was enthusiastic about the deal, but I pointed out that Hartwell had significant environmental liabilities related to their work on federal projects. I suggested he investigate their EPA compliance record before proceeding. He followed my advice and discovered that Hartwell was facing fines that would have cost Coleman Industries millions of dollars. The merger was canceled, saving the company from financial disaster. I could see Vernon nodding in the gallery, confirming my story. How many times would you estimate you provided business advice to your husband over the years? Hundreds of times. Weekly, sometimes daily conversations about strategy, personnel decisions, market opportunities. My husband often called me from work to discuss difficult negotiations because he valued my perspective. Judge Morrison was taking notes. Mrs. Coleman, if you possessed this level of business acumen, why didn't you seek a more active role in the company? I paused, considering how to answer honestly without sounding bitter. Your Honor, I tried. Early in our marriage, I expressed interest in joining the business. My husband and father-in-law made it clear that my role was to support my husband from home, not to participate in company operations. When I persisted, I was told that my questions were inappropriate and that I should focus on more suitable activities like charity work and homemaking. So you decided to become a shareholder instead? I decided to use my skills in the way that was available to me. If I couldn't contribute to Coleman Industries as an employee, I would contribute as an investor, and eventually as an owner. Your Honor, Whitman stood up again. Even if we accept Mrs. Coleman's claims about her education and business knowledge, the fact remains that she has concealed these stock purchases from her family for decades. This suggests deception and manipulation. Judge Morrison looked at me. Mrs. Coleman, why did you keep your stock purchases secret? I took a deep breath. This was the moment of truth. Your Honor, I kept my purchases secret because my family had made it clear for 43 years that they considered me intellectually inferior. If they had known I was becoming a major shareholder, they would have found ways to stop me or minimize my influence. The only way to ensure I could build meaningful ownership was to do it quietly, legally, and thoroughly. And now that your ownership is revealed, what are your intentions for the company? I intend to run Coleman Industries as a socially responsible business that treats its employees fairly, invests in the community, and promotes qualified individuals regardless of gender or background. I have detailed plans for employee profit sharing, community development projects, and environmental sustainability initiatives. Judge Morrison looked toward Augustus's table. Mr. Whitman, do you wish to cross-examine? Whitman stood up, clearly off balance. Mrs. Coleman, if you're as knowledgeable about business as you claim, why didn't you simply divorce your husband and start your own company? I smiled. Because Coleman Industries was built by the community I grew up in. The workers who built this company are my neighbors, my church family, my friends. I didn't want to start a competing business that might hurt their jobs. I wanted to ensure that the company they helped build would be run by someone who values their contributions. But surely you must harbor resentment toward your family for treating you poorly? I harbor disappointment, Mr. Whitman, but I've spent 43 years learning patience and strategic thinking. This was never about revenge. This was about ensuring that Coleman Industries reaches its full potential under leadership that understands the value of every person's contribution. Your Honor, Whitman said desperately, I call Augustus Coleman to testify about his daughter-in-law's character and capabilities. Augustus took the stand looking like a man facing execution. Mr. Coleman, in your opinion, does your daughter-in-law have the business knowledge to run a multi-million-dollar company? Augustus hesitated, clearly torn between his prejudices and the evidence he'd just heard. I have always known Dolores to be an intelligent woman. But does she have the specific knowledge and experience to manage Coleman Industries? Augustus looked around the courtroom, his eyes landing on me. She has always taken an interest in the business. Perhaps more than I realized. Whitman looked panicked. Mr. Coleman, surely you don't believe your daughter-in-law is qualified to— Your Honor, Jerome interrupted. I call Vernon Coleman to testify. Vernon walked to the witness stand with shaking hands. When he was sworn in, he looked directly at me. Mr. Coleman, how would you characterize your wife's business knowledge? Vernon was quiet for a long moment. My wife is the most intelligent person I've ever known. For 20 years, she has been my closest advisor and the source of my best ideas. Coleman Industries' success over the past 2 decades is largely due to her insights and strategic thinking. Can you give specific examples? Dozens of them. The Hartwell merger she mentioned, but also our expansion into renewable energy, our employee retention programs, our community partnership initiatives. Every major success Coleman Industries has had since 2005 can be traced back to conversations with my wife. And yet, she was not given credit for these contributions? Vernon's voice broke slightly. No. I took credit for her ideas because I was too proud and too stupid to acknowledge that my wife was smarter than me. Judge Morrison called for a brief recess. During the break, I saw Augustus huddled with his lawyers, their conversation growing increasingly heated. When court resumed, Judge Morrison had clearly made her decision. After reviewing the evidence presented today, this court finds no basis for questioning Mrs. Coleman's mental competence or her legal right to exercise her shareholder privileges. Mrs. Coleman has demonstrated exceptional knowledge of business and finance, and her stock purchases were legal, properly documented, and ethically sound. She turned to look directly at Augustus. Furthermore, this court is troubled by the underlying assumptions in this case. The plaintiff's assertion that a woman cannot possess business acumen simply because she has been a homemaker reveals a bias that has no place in a court of law. Augustus slumped in his chair as Judge Morrison continued. The injunction is denied. Mrs. Coleman is free to exercise all rights as majority shareholder of Coleman Industries. This court also strongly encourages all parties to resolve their remaining disputes through civil discussion rather than litigation. As the courtroom cleared, I remained seated, feeling 43 years of weight lifting from my shoulders. Jerome shook my hand. Congratulations, Mrs. Coleman. You're officially the most powerful person in that family now." I looked across the courtroom where Augustus was gathering his papers with shaking hands. Vernon approached him, but the old man pushed him away and stalked out of the courthouse alone. Vernon walked over to me. "Dee, I'm sorry. For everything." "I know you are. The question is what you're going to do with that sorry." "I want to learn. I want to be the partner you deserved from the beginning." I studied his face one more time. "We'll see, Vernon. We'll see." That afternoon, I walked into the Coleman Industries boardroom as the majority owner for the first time. The entire board of directors was present, along with several department heads who'd requested to attend. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, taking my seat at the head of the table, "I'm Dolores Coleman, and as of today, I'm your new chairman and CEO." The room was dead silent. I know this comes as a surprise to many of you. For those who don't know me, I've been married to Vernon Coleman for 43 years, and I've been a shareholder in this company for 27 years. I have an MBA from Georgetown and 40 years of experience analyzing this business from every angle. I opened the folder containing my business plan. Over the next year, we're going to implement some changes. First, we're establishing an employee profit-sharing program. Second, we're creating a community development fund that will invest 10% of our annual profits in local housing, education, and small business initiatives. Third, we're promoting Geneva, Washington, from office manager to vice president of human resources. She's earned it. Geneva, who was sitting at the far end of the table, looked like she might faint. Finally, we're establishing a new policy. Coleman Industries will be an equal opportunity employer in every sense of the phrase. Promotions will be based on merit, not gender, race, or family connections. I looked around the table at faces that ranged from shocked to skeptical to excited. I know some of you are wondering what this means for current leadership. Vernon Coleman will remain as senior vice president if he chooses to accept a role that involves actual accountability for his decisions. Augustus Coleman has chosen to retire, effective immediately. I stood up and walked to the window overlooking the construction site where Coleman Industries was building affordable housing for first-time homebuyers. This company was built by hard-working people who deserved better than they got. Starting today, they're going to get it. 6 months later, I was in that same boardroom reviewing quarterly reports when Keisha knocked on my door. "Mama, you have a visitor." Terrence appeared behind her, looking nervous. "Mama, do you have a minute to talk?" I gestured for him to sit down. Over the past 6 months, Terrence had been working hard to prove himself worthy of a leadership role in the new Coleman Industries. He'd taken a voluntary demotion to learn the business from the ground up, and he'd been treating female colleagues with a respect I'd never seen from him before. "What's on your mind, baby?" "I wanted to tell you that Shanae and I have been talking about the way I was raised, about the attitudes I learned from Daddy." He took a deep breath. "We want to do better with our children. And Mama, I want to learn from you. Really learn. Not just about business, but about how to be a better man." I smiled at my son, seeing glimpses of the thoughtful little boy he'd once been. "I'd like that, Terrence. I'd like that very much." That evening, I drove home to the house in Potomac that was finally starting to feel like mine. Vernon was in the kitchen making dinner, something he'd started doing as part of his campaign to become a better husband. "How was your day?" he asked, the same question he'd asked for 43 years, but now he actually listened to the answer. "Productive. We broke ground on the new community center, and the employee satisfaction scores are up 30% since we implemented the profit-sharing program." Vernon smiled. "You're amazing. You know that?" I looked at my husband, this man who was slowly learning to see me as I really was. "Yes, Vernon. I know." As I sat on my back porch that night, looking out at the garden I'd tended for 4 decades, I thought about the woman I'd been when this all started. The quiet wife who arranged flowers and kept her mouth shut about business. She'd served her purpose. She'd kept me safe while I built my empire in secret, protected me while I gathered the strength and resources I needed to claim my rightful place. But that woman was gone now. In her place was someone I'd always been, but never been allowed to be. Dolores Coleman, CEO. A woman who'd turned $50,000 into a fortune, who'd built a business empire while the men around her thought she was just decorating their lives. My phone buzzed with a text from Jerome Washington. "Board meeting went well, I hear. Congratulations on everything you've accomplished." I typed back, "This is just the beginning." And it was. After 43 years of being underestimated, dismissed, and treated like a pretty decoration, I was finally free to be exactly who I'd always been. The most dangerous thing you can do to a smart woman is convince her that her only value lies in being quiet and looking pretty. Because while you're busy congratulating yourself on keeping her in her place, she might just be quietly buying your company out from under you. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.